And welcome to Colin Smith Museum of Fine Arts at Auburn University. I'm Shivani Alpati, a sophomore majoring in professional flight and a student guide here at the Jule. Tonight, it is my distinct pleasure to welcome you to a talk with the artist Binh Danh and scholar Krystle Stricklin. Our event tonight is being recorded and will be available on the museum's YouTube channel. If you're here in person, please remember to silence your cell phones. And now, to introduce the evening's program, please join me in welcoming Chris Molinsky, the Janet L. Nolan Director of Curatorial and Educational Programs here at the Jule.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. Thank you for being here tonight. It's such a pleasure to welcome back our friend Binh Danh to Auburn to celebrate his exhibition, Binh Danh Advancing American Art. If you haven't seen the exhibition yet, you could grab a few minutes after the talk tonight, but more importantly, it'll be on view through December. It's a really spectacular solo exhibition of Binh's work, and we're incredibly proud to have this project at the museum. Binh Danh is a visionary artist whose practice reimagines traditional photographic techniques to explore layered connections between memory, place, and belonging. He's widely recognized for his contemporary daguerreotypes of national parks, striking works that you'll see in the gallery here with mirrored surfaces that invite all of you to see yourself reflected in the American landscape. Earlier in his career, as Binh will talk about in a minute, he pioneered a remarkable process known as the chlorophyll printing process, embedding photographic images into leaves through photosynthesis. His work is held in the permanent collections of major institutions, including the Smithsonian American Art Museum, the Getty, the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, the National Gallery of Art, SF MoMA. Binh is a graduate of Stanford University and San Jose State University, where he currently serves as an associate professor of art. We first met Binh last year when he was selected as the first recipient of the William Collins Smith Auburn Award for Advancing American Art. This award was established last year to honor the memory of our friend, Bill Smith, a champion of the museum, through a transformational gift by the Julia and Albert Smith Foundation. Each year, we gather together a group of museum professionals, directors, and curators at other institutions across the country to nominate individuals who they think exemplify our contemporary moment, contributing in significant ways to the field of American art. I can tell you it was an incredible pool of nominations, which are kept entirely private, and we were thrilled that Binh emerged as the first recipient of the prize. After we knew that Binh received the prize, it was too tempting to invite him to have a solo exhibition at the museum, because we knew that this year we would be celebrating the upcoming 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. And our theme this year is the idea of belonging in American art. Binh, thank you for all that you've done for Auburn and for being here again tonight. Following Binh's short talk tonight, we're also delighted that he will be joined in conversation by the scholar Krystle Stricklin, an art historian, curator, and educator whose work brings critical insight to the history of photography. Dr. Stricklin is an assistant curator of photography at the Smithsonian American Art Museum, where she was previously an NEA curatorial fellow. In 2021, she received the Joan and Stanford Alexander Award for dissertations in photography from the Museum of Fine Arts Houston, and earned her PhD in art history from the University of Pittsburgh. So following Binh's talk, the two of them will be on stage, and then we'll have some time at the very end for questions from all of you. Now, please join me in welcoming Binh Danh.
Okay, well, thank you, Chris, and thank you so much for being here tonight. This has been a fantastic journey from receiving the award to now returning for an exhibit. So you've been staring at this picture for a while. So as a teenager, now as an adult, I could never have imagined where art making would take me. And I want to underscore the Jule Museum's models to be curious. The best place to be curious is at museums. Artists and museum workers do this labor on behalf of our community. So please continue to show up and be curious. So thanks again for being here tonight. So I want to begin with some background information. This is a photo of me in Vietnam. I was born in Vietnam in 1977, 2 years after the Vietnam War ended. And 2 years later, at the end of 1979, my family and I left Vietnam as refugees known as Bo people. When I was a child, my mom told me that on the night we escaped, the town was flooded and I was ill with a very high fever. When we snuck onto the boat and hid below the top deck, the water from the block of melting ice dripping down cooled my body, calming me for the long journey. And as a child, this story resonated with me as I imagined my survival on this boat. After a week at sea, we arrived at a refugee camp in Malaysia. And a year later, we were granted asylum in the United States. My family's journey as refugees has always fascinated me so much that in my early 20s, I decided to visit Vietnam. And Vietnam was an emotional trip because it was the first time I met my grandmother. And I was astonished when she showed me this baby photo. Growing up in the US, I have never seen a picture of me as a baby before. Then she showed me this one, a portrait of my family made in studio. My grandmother said that these were the few family photographs she held on to while we were lost at sea. Growing up, I sought out Vietnam by looking at photographs of war. Vietnam, for me, as a child, was always a war-torn country. But seeing pictures of my family changed that. And what was remarkable about this family portrait was that it was a picture I have seen before. I was very familiar with it. It was the same photo I grew up in my family album. This one is of our first family portrait taken in our adopted country. The background in the black and white photo of us in Vietnam is the real color setting of us in San Jose, California. And from this experience, I realized how important archives are to my work. When I was in college in the late 1990s, eBay was a new .com, and I found myself browsing for materials from the Vietnam War period. I began collecting cultural materials, including Life magazine and personal photographs taken by soldiers and civilians. And I exhibit these artifacts with my artwork. I traveled to these sites to see them, and I knew what happened there because of a photograph I had seen. For example, here I am in Laos witnessing the remnants of the Vietnam War. Thousands of bomb craters are still visible on the land today. And for me, the bomb craters are like scars, and scars are reminders of past wounds and the natural process of healing that occurs within the body. Art has the power to reveal and to heal. And to further this idea, I created a photographic printing process called chlorophyll prints. I use pictures I found during my research to print image onto leaves, utilizing the light-sensitive properties of the leaf's chlorophyll. I thought, what if the plants could witness these horrific events? What would they remember? What would they say? And what could they teach us? We learn in school that all matters is composed of atoms of the various elements. That is, atoms rearrange themselves according to the law of nature. All those atoms that compose us carry memories that return to the beginning of time. They were involved in numerous conflicts before the Vietnam War. This project explored an idea I call elemental transmigration, the transformations of matters into other forms. The war became part of the landscape, and nature remembered the traumas in the elements that compose it. Many of you are familiar with the photo called Buddhist Monk Burns by war photographer Malcolm Brown. As a child, I came across Malcolm Brown's photographs in the Time Life 25-volume book set called Vietnam Experience. And I was taken by this image of the monk sitting in a peaceful lotus position with flames coming from his body. I imagined the smell of smoke coming from the burning robe and flesh. And in an instant, the smoke and ashes joined the air and breath of the onlookers. And sometimes I stumble upon casualties of war, such as this June 27, 19 issue of Life magazine called The Faces of the American Dead in Vietnam, One Week Toll. Life magazine published the portraits of 242 American soldiers in this issue who were killed during an ordinary week of May 28 to June 3, 1969. By looking at these portraits, we are reminded that a death in a war is not just a number, but an actual life. These faces are fathers, brothers, and sons, and have become part of our collective memories. To photograph is to remember. A photograph is a picture of the past. A photograph can only capture a slice of time. The documentary filmmaker Ken Burns once said, "Photographs are the DNA of our memories." And I love that idea that photographs allow us to remember. So what happened to soldiers who die in war? How do their memories become part of the landscape? A photo like this one by war photographer Larry Barrows of 4 Marines recovered the body of a 5th under fire had a big impression on me. I thought of memories as bodily fluid leaving a trail in the landscape. So I printed portrait of the one week's dead onto leaves of grass. As a kid, while sitting on grass on a hot summer day wearing shorts, I always noticed how grass blade embossed himself on my legs, and how when I stood up, I left memories of myself on the grass in the form of my own embossment. That contact is exchange of memories. In 2009, I had the chance to live in Virginia, teaching at a college. And during my time in the South, I began to discover Walt Whitman's poetry. And here's a poem from Songs of Myself. I bequeath myself to the dirt to grow from the grass I love. If you want me again, look for me under your boots so. This year marks the 50th anniversary of the fall of Saigon to North Vietnamese forces, effectively ending the Vietnam War. Now, this is a daguerreotype of Whitman. The daguerreotype, invented in 1839 in France, was the first photographic process to become commercially available. It produced a photographic image on a silver plate. In Specimen Day, Walt Whitman wrote, "The real world will never get in the books," which he meant essentially the personal experiences of soldiers from war would not be included in the history textbook. That was true in his time as it is today. As the United States embarks on other wars, we see makeshift memorials to remember our fallen soldiers. In November of 2006, residents of Lafayette, California, and neighboring communities began placing crosses on a private property across from the BART train station. They called this the Lafayette Hillside Memorial. These symbols were to memorialize the American soldiers who have died in the war in Iraq. A sign was added to update the numbers of soldiers who had made the ultimate sacrifice. It seems to them that the country was blind to the terrible human costs of war. I have been making daguerreotypes of this hillside for the past decade, watching it change, decay, and renew. I made this daguerreotype of the memorial in 2011. And in this project, I recognize that I am a witness to history. In the 19th century, the daguerreotype was described as a mirror with a memory, a mirror that was held up to your face and remembers your likeness. The daguerreotype is in reverse because it's a mirror image. The long exposure, about a minute, blur out the flag and reminds me of blurry flags in Civil War photography. And for every US soldier's death, there were countless more Iraqi and Afghan casualties. If you flip the writings in your mind, the sign reads, Corporal Sean Levin. I struggle to read the writing, slowing me down when viewing war pictures. Each of these crosses is a portrait of our fallen soldiers. And like a gravestone, the family members take care of the crosses. And like all of us, why I hold sacred my freedom as an American, I'm also troubled by its actual cost in human lives. This daguerreotype depicts the first time I photographed James Coon Cross. While photographing this cross, I was deeply moved by the faded family pictures and the angel sitting on top of it, and the soldier's beret that personified the shape of the cross. The following year, I was pleased to see the faded photographs replaced with new ones. The photograph faded again a year later, and the beret slowly sank into the cross. As the photographs fade and are replaced by the family members, the public learns about James Coon and share in the process of remembrance. I gave a talk at the Lafayette Library a while back entitled my talk, A Protest Against Forgetting. I returned that summer and found this cross, A Protest Against Forgetting. By photographing this landscape and engaging with the community surrounding it, I'm also becoming part of it. My new daguerreotype series is titled All I'm Asking For Is My Body. This project was first shown at last year's Photo Fest in Houston, Texas, a gathering dedicated to advancing photography and visual culture through the presentation of exposition, public programs, and publication. This series is inspired by Mitin Murayami's novel, All I'm Asking For Is My Body. It was a reading in one of my Asian American study courses during my college years. The story is about a second-generation Japanese-American boy named Kuyo, who grew up in a 1930s Hawaiian sugar cane plantation. The novels explore pride, poverty, plantation life, and individualism. The title of the book, All I'm Asking For Is My Body, prompts me to think about my body and whether I have the freedom to own it, to be my own self, to control my own labor, and to determine how my body moves in the environment. At times, is my body a threat? Is it foreign, or can it belong? In this series, I collected photographs of plantation worker produced in the late 19th and early 20th century, many sourced from eBay. These photographs depict the labors on the plantation as well as the plantation owners overseeing the crops and workers. In viewing these images, we see the lives of those who labor and harvest these cash crops, creating wealth for the landowner, owners, and at times the colonizer who exploit the land economically and rarely share the profits with those workers, of course, as in the case of slavery. In making daguerreotypes on silver platters, I revealed the connection between the wealthy landowner and the bodies that work the land. This platter is called Picking Cotton on a Great Plantation in North Carolina. The title came from the stereo card's description. At first, it seems to be an innocent relaxation of a person in a basket of freshly plucked cotton. But picking cotton was extremely hard on the hands, and enslaved people often suffer painful injuries from it. The seed pods are rough, woody, and they can cut and scrape the fingers and palms. Enslaved people pick cotton from dawn until dusk, often filling sacks that weighed over 50 pounds. The constant picking motion lead to blister, calluses, and open sore that rarely had time to heal. Many enslaved people recall that their hands bleed daily during cotton picking season. This is a stereograph title, A Typical Tobacco Plantation, Province of Havana, Cuba, 1899. We associate silverware with wealth, which has deep historical, cultural, and symbolic roots, as well as social ritual. For centuries, silver was considered a form of currency. Owning large amount of silver signaled wealth and purchasing power. In early society, your tableware was essentially part of your financial portfolio. As mentioned earlier, the earliest forms of photography, the daguerreotype, was made on a polished silver plate, which already tied photography to ideas of preciousness and wealth. Sitting for a daguerreotype was expensive, so the medium itself functioned like silverware, a luxury item signifying status. All I'm asking for is my body calls our attention to acknowledge this history, the bodies that work the land and the homes, their self-autonomy, aspiration, and wealth accumulated by individuals, corporation, institution, and today's empire. When I'm not inside making art, I'm out and about in the national park, contemplating a deeper meaning to the land by making daguerreotypes. The top two pictures shows my darkened van named Louis, after the inventor of the daguerreotype process, Louis Daguerre. And of course, the bottom two pictures shows my camera photographing this landscape. As a child living in California, I never had the chance to visit Yosemite Valley, but I have seen it in image in photo books, such as those by Ansel Adams. And as a college student, I couldn't see myself creating pictures like those of Ansel Adams, since as a student, we were encouraged to come up with new ways of seeing and making photographs. I started practicing landscape photography with the daguerreotype process first in Virginia. When I returned to California from my time in Virginia, the California landscape was new to my eyes, and it was the first time for me. It was time for me to visit Yosemite Valley. And using the daguerreotype process, I have developed a distinct approach to visualizing an old photographic subject. Making daguerreotypes of the national parks allow me to insert myself into the landscape as a form of citizenship, as to say, I belong here. This is the artist Brandon Bing, a past graduate student of mine from Hawaii. And Brandon is reflected in the Roosevelt Arch at the north entrance to Yellowstone National Park. And I waited several hours for the sun to illuminate the quote above the entrance. The top of the arch is inscribed with a quote from the Organic Act of 1872, the legislation that created Yellowstone. It said, for the benefit and enjoyment of the people. The arch was not originally intended to honor Roosevelt. Still, he was so named because the president was vacationing in the park during the arch construction and was asked to speak at the dedication ceremony on April 23rd, 1903. He helped lay the cornerstone of the arch and gave a speech to 2,000 people who have attended the ceremony. He said, "Yellowstone Park is something absolutely unique in the world. This park was created and is now administrated for the benefit and enjoyment of the people." And he added, "It is the property of Uncle Sam and therefore of us all." That line, "It's the property of Uncle Sam," is a part that gives me chill. Although, yes, this place needed to be protected, but it was done at the removal of the indigenous community. A time capsule was inserted during the ceremony beneath the cornerstone of the Roosevelt Arch, containing a Bible, a newspaper, and a picture of Theodore Roosevelt. The daguerreotype does not represent reality the way we see it. The image is richly high-resolution photographic object. The silver crystal produced prismatic colors that shift between blues and pink. And today, daguerreotypes are obsolete as a form of commercial photography. And in that way, they are indeed an art form. While photographing the park, I based my composition on my memories of those early photographs I had seen, like those by the 19th century photographer Carleton Watkins and Edward Muybridge. Because each daguerreotype is unique and unreproducible, it is impossible to record the same image twice. After the American Civil War, many landscape photographers working for the Matthew Brady studio in DC began publishing photographs of war. For the first time, the public could see the carnage of a nation divided. But those pictures were not well received by the public. People wanted to avoid facing the reality of war. But then a different type of photography had begun circulating from photographers in the West and made their way to Washington, D.C. The Carleton Watkins Yosemite photograph sparked President Abraham Lincoln in 1864 to sign legislation giving Yosemite Valley to the state of California. And this is a quote, "Upon the express condition that the premise shall be held for public use, resort, and recreation." This set the stage for the creation of the National Park Service. And historical sites are my favorite to visit. This obelisk is in the cemetery at Manzanar National Historical Site on the east side of the Sierra Nevada mountain range in California. Japanese Americans were incarcerated at the Manzanar War Relocation Center from March 21st, 1942 to November 21st, 1945, a period about 3 years and 8 months. This daguerreotype on your left is of a watchtower. I exposed the plate right at sunset and I had to guess on the exposure, so I exposed it for 2 or 3 minutes more than I regularly expose it. And it's one of the more sinister images from this series. The image on the right showed the remaining encampment situated next to a basketball court. By September of 1942, Manzanar held over 10,000 Japanese Americans. And Manzanar officially closed a few months later after Japanese surrender in August of 1945. Many former inmates had nowhere to return to. Their homes and business were often lost during their imprisonment. This row of posts shows where the encampment used to be. So if you had families who were imprisoned at Manzanar, you can trace where they were locked up. After the camp closed, the local communities repurposed the building materials to construct their own homes, which are now probably in a state of decay today. It's mind-boggling driving around and finding dilapidated homes that were once incarcerating a Japanese American family. This historical site is known as Trinity Site at the White Sand National Monument. This is a replica of Fat Man, the plutonium bomb that was dropped on the Japanese city of Nagasaki in August 9, 1945. The daguerreotype long exposure lasting a minute or two rendered the father and his son and their dog Ghostlight dissolving into the ether. In this picture at Joshua Tree National Park, I'm thinking about balance. Here, a boulder that was lodged millions of years ago during a rockfall is held in this formation. It's important, how does this country continue to balance itself? I'm also a Libra, so balancing and fairness are essential to me. That's the meaning of the national park system. It's like this perfect thing we're trying to achieve. And one of my favorite rock formation in Yosemite Valley is called Three Brothers. It is reflected in the waters of the Merced River during the late summer season. In 1851, the Mariposa Battalion named this formation Three Brother after the capture of the Chief Tenaya's three sons near the base of a rock. The Mariposa Battalion was formed to defeat native tribes in what today some historians refer to as the California Genocide. 100 years later, in 1955, the Vietnam War started. Here's a portrait of my mother carrying my brother and me in a refugee camp. I call it Two Brothers and a Mom. War-torn consequence of refugees fleeing is an American story imbued in our landscape far and near. So thank you. Okay, sound check.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for being here tonight with us. And I just want to start by saying thank you to everyone at the Jule for arranging this and for giving us such a warm welcome here in Auburn. I was delighted to be asked to join you in conversation tonight, Ben, firstly because I'm just such a huge admirer of your work. I think as evidenced by our recent acquisition of 8 of your Yosemite daguerreotypes for the Smithsonian American Art Museum's permanent collection, which I'm happy to say we'll have on view next year in our contemporary art galleries. But I also jumped at this opportunity to return to the South. While I do call the Northeast my home now, I actually grew up in the Carolinas, and I went to college and undergrad in the Florida Panhandle at Florida State University, not too far from here. So in many ways, coming back to the South always feels like coming home to me. And I think that this feeling or sense of belonging to a place is obviously something that I'd like to talk about more this evening because it's clearly something that you think about very deeply in your work. But I'd like to begin our chat with a discussion about your unique working methods and the photographic processes you use and experiment with. Can you tell us maybe a little bit more about how you research and learn about these methods, like printing on leaves and silver plates and such?
Well, definitely. So I went to a program when I got my BFA at San Jose State, and we were very encouraged to experiment with different forms of photography. And, when you're studying photography, there's so many paths you can take. You can be, these terms are interesting in the photo community, but you could be a straight photographer, which means you just photograph, print, and then you have your picture. You don't do no manipulation. Or you could play around with what they call alternative processes. So these are like 19th century processes, or maybe they might be breaking these rules. Like, for example, you could paint on your picture, or you can, you can make a construction out of it. So or get off the wall. So these were some of the encouragement from my mentors when I was in the program. And just through those dialogues, I started to play around all these different processes in my work.
Amazing. And I feel like I have to ask more about Louis, your darkroom van.
Okay.
I think this is such a wonderful nod to, 19th century survey photographers who had to devise their own sort of mobile darkrooms and tents, and they had all this heavy equipment that they had to carry, up and down mountains. Of course, in their case, this was all powered by donkeys and not motor vehicles.
Yes.
But I wonder if you can describe a little bit more like what a typical day is like in Louis, or how do you prepare for these expeditions, and what are some of the like challenges you encounter out in the field?
Yeah, so we modern people are very fortunate. Back in the days of carts and walk-ins, as it's mentioned by Krystle here, you need to get a donkey, and it'll take like from San Francisco to Yosemite Valley, it'll probably take like maybe a few days, maybe a week or so, just to travel that far. But for me, of course, everything's our layout. I can go into Google Map and look at the road condition. I also have to pack up my van. So before heading out to photograph, I'll be making silver plates in my studio. So I have this place ready. And then I pack up the van. I have all my chemistries there. And it's as you can see in the slide, it's just a normal like caravan. There's nothing really special about it. But other than that, it helps me to travel and get out there. And of course, when you enter into the national park, they make it really easy for everyday Americans and visitors, because all I do is find a parking lot and I'm there all day long making a photograph. And it's kind of boring to travel with me if on one of these so-called expeditions, but it's because I'm just there looking at the same scene over and over and trying to get that perfect plate that's going to work for the project. But of course, there's a lot of headaches in photographing that way, because it's a slow form of photography. I'm synthesizing the plate, which takes several minutes, and then of course I need to pack my gears, tripod, and of course if I'm nearby a view that is right close to the parking lot, which is always great because I'm not traveling far, but sometimes I do make these really long hikes, like these like almost half-day hikes, like going up to Upper Yosemite Fall or Nevada Falls, or Mirror Lake. I'm carrying around like 50, well, I would say about 40 pounds of equipment, and you see hikers out there, of course, going wilderness hiking, and they're carrying a lot more gears than I am too. But people are always perplexed at what I'm carrying. They think I'm carrying a music instrument because I have these large format cameras too. So to make a large picture, like the 12 by 20 inch daguerreotypes in the show here, I need to have a 12 by 20 inch camera that kind of folds out and position out there and make the exposure. So once I'm done making the exposure, I just pack everything up and then I go back to the van. So I work alone, it kind of works better for me not to have it to be responsible for someone else. And then I'm in the van, I'm developing my plates, and all my laboratory equipment's there. At the same time, I'm probably maybe synthesizing another plate because I know that plate might work out, might not. I want to go back and photograph another scene there. And of course, when I'm doing all this, the condition is changing. So that's also the other hard thing is like, my exposure is about a minute or 2 minutes. So wind could be a factor. And especially in the national park, you never, even though the condition could be sunny and bright in the morning, in the evening, the winds could definitely pick up. And then, it's just working within that condition. I always have to sort of like pivot and switch. Yeah. So, but yeah, that sounds like a day in the life of me and Louie.
It's, as you describe it, it's such a labor-intensive process. So
Yeah.
thinking about that compared to how we just press a button on our cell phones to take a photo, there's a wide range there in that.
Yeah.
Do you have any trips in Louis planned for the future?
Oh, for the near future, well, definitely. I mean, I think I once, I also teach, so once the semester cooled down a little bit, I actually want to get back to Yosemite Valley. And also, actually, I live in Gilroy, California, which is not far from Pinnacle National Park. And it's a park that's kind of sort of dear to my heart because it's close by, but it's also the park in 2008, Obama made it a national park before leaving office. So to sort of protect that land. So it has this connection to me to the Obama era.
Amazing.
So yeah, so I'm probably gonna head out there. I also photograph all over the Bay Area, California. Landscape photography is sort of my territory. As an art student, I was very influenced by Robert Franks, and his series called The Americans, where he traveled the United States and making pictures. And that's like the best way to understand this country. It's just sort of like get on the road and make pictures, and hopefully I could maybe continue to do that as I navigate this landscape.
Amazing. Speaking of landscape photography, I was listening to your episode of the Jule Museum podcast earlier this week and hearing you speak about your interest in landscapes and how there is perhaps this misperception that landscape photography is very simple and very peaceful, but you say in this episode, but the land is not always peaceful. And so I'm wondering if we can just unpack that statement a little bit. What do you mean when you say the land is not always peaceful?
Yeah. I guess it's a pretty provocative statement to say, but I think every land has history in it in some way, and of course a lot of history about the land is it's history about our country and what happened there. I mean, today when we go to Yosemite Valley, we don't think of it as a war zone, but it was a war zone back in those days. Same thing as some of the other national parks. So just sort of acknowledging that not everything is there's these stories in the park that, or the landscapes themselves that want to be revealed, and then I feel like my job as an artist is to help to do that through making art. So yeah, of course, landscape can be peaceful too, but it's also understanding the full story of a land. I think is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. So returning for a minute now to this notion of belonging, I'm thinking now of your very beautiful publication, The Enigma of Belonging, with Radius Books, which I have a copy of back on my desk in DC, and I think there's some copies here at the museum's store in the gift shop. But in the text, you speak so beautifully about this complicated notion of belonging and also unbelonging. And so I just wanted to sort of ask, what does belonging mean to you as a Vietnamese American, as a refugee, particularly in today's world? And how do you contend with that as an artist?
Yeah. So I was approached by Radius Press right during COVID to work on a book. And of course, I was just thinking about what was going on in the country during that time, of the COVID virus and being an Asian person and, the attack on Asian Americans and Asian people because of the virus. So, it was really interesting for me and just to think about like, what should I make this book about? And so I came up with this title, The Enigma of Belonging, because it's sort of something I feel today, or even when I was growing up, that there's always this feeling of being a foreigner, or, being not from this place, And it's a feeling now I'm sort of comfortable with. And it's good to be comfortable with that, It's something I imagine like Robert Frank probably felt that same way when he was working on the Americans, because he was I believe a Swiss immigrant. Is that correct? Yeah. And so he applied for this fellowship, the Guggenheim. So he was seeing America from like a different point of view, And I think when you're able to be in this middle zone, you try to see it from this other perspective. So the enigma of belonging is just sort of understanding that feeling,
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
So I have sort of one final question, and then I think we're gonna maybe open it up to the audience. But I wanted to ask you about the show's subtitle, Advancing American Art. And I just want to say hats off to you and to everyone here who worked on that show. It's just truly exquisite. And so this controversy around this 1946, State Department sponsored exhibition has kind of become renowned in art history. I was delighted to learn more about Auburn's place in this history and how they kind of gained from this controversy. But I'm wondering how you see your work sort of in the context of this historic exhibition and then its aftermath. And then also, what do you think we can learn from this past?
Yeah. So I didn't know much about advancing the American art exhibit itself until I received this award. And once I got this award, I was like, wow, this is such a really big title, like me advancing the American art. I was like, okay, I was just making work as an artist as any artist do. So I'm very honored to be tied to that idea. But I don't know. I think that is like one of the great thing of being part of this experiment. Like this, whether we were able, as an artist, you're able to advance these materials, these subject matters, just to making art. So I don't have a clear formation to your answer. I'm sorry, to your question. But knowing that also the exhibit itself was very controversial back in the day, and I think about my work too. I don't go out to make controversial work. It's not my motive. I know there's artists who actually sort of do that, in a way. But I sometimes wonder in the subject matters I'm touching upon, it's, a certain subject matter that people don't want to talk about, right?
Yeah.
Like the attack on, diversity, equity, inclusion, or any sort of subject matters like that kind of comes to being. So, and I find like, this country is so amazing that it can hold all these history. No history needs to be censored. Just because you have one history doesn't mean it replaces another history. It's just like, it's just history. We learn from these history and we make sense of ourselves from our founding to where we are today. So yeah, so it's really important that we continue to advance as a society, as artists, as a country, just move forward. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think if we'll take some time to have questions from the audience, and I think Chris is back
Have
there.
a microphone, so
Microphone.
raise your hand. There we go.
So hi, Professor Don. My name is Ryan Montgomery. I actually wanted to thank you because you spoke earlier to our art history class, so thank you for that. But my question mainly deals with, similar question to what she asked, was, within holding multiple identities of both American and Vietnamese, refugee and the like, how do you kind of put these identities together in your mind? And throughout your pieces, you kind of struggle with that and show that struggle. Do you believe that this is a lifelong struggle, or can it be kind of reconciled?
I know. I mean, I think I mean, it can be a struggle at times in someone's life to hold multiple identities, but I think that just what makes life more interesting for me, to be able to be like hyphenated, like an Asian American. You know, of course, in the Bay Area, I'm probably more like a Vietnamese American because, you know, we want to be particularly what type of Asian you are. But, you know, depending where you sort of navigate throughout the country, you know, it's just, yeah, I think identity is just a really fascinating formation, you know, because someday I might be disabled, you know, and that becomes part of my identity. You know, gender is an identity. And I think the much more you understand that part of who you are, it sort of kind of makes you feel much more fully as a human, as you know. So I think that's just so really important. But, you know, there's a lot of attack on identity politics today, you know, but it's obviously we're living a different time than I was. I mean, than the time when I was growing up, like multiculturalism, you know, was sort of like the buzzword, and of course today it's like DEI, things like that. And I don't have a really solid answer for you, but I think it's all through looking in the mirror and seeing who you are. And I think maybe the work in this exhibit helps people just to look into the mirror themselves, because they see themselves in these national park landscape, you know, and hopefully think about their own identity.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to pass this down. Maybe could you help me?
Hi again. I was just wondering, do you ever feel a disconnect between being an Asian American versus like someone who's raised in Asia? Because I know you spent the majority of your life in like the US, and you mentioned also going back in your 20s and having like this like amazing like journey, like kind of like rediscovering your roots. But did you ever feel a disconnect between that and like kind of just capturing culture that you kind of didn't like grow up around?
Yeah, you know, so you fully understand that you're an Asian American when you visit the country of where you were born and left, like in my case, or the country of maybe your parents if they're immigrated to the U.S., and you realize you're not Vietnamese. Because when I first visited Vietnam in my 20s, I was like, I could never imagine a country full of Vietnamese people before, like all speaking Vietnamese, and you know, they obviously have a different life in the way I have. Like when I met my cousin for the first time, who was the same age as me, I just imagine where I would if we had exchanged places, right? What if I'm the one who's staying in Vietnam and he came to the U.S., right? So yeah, you start to negotiate these experiences in one's life, and as the last question started to form like this other identity. Yeah.
Do you think it influenced the way that you view your subject matter in a way? Because I'm assuming if you were in your cousin's place in Vietnam and you were viewing like war through that like lens, that would be a lot different than someone who like escaped Vietnam. Like, and I know those people are kind of seen as like traitors. Like my family gets that sometimes. Do you think that kind of like view on yourself being like an immigrant impacted that?
Well, you know, when I was growing up in the U.S., I mean, the Vietnam War is something I know about, right? Because it was like in the movies I saw, the Hollywood films, but it wasn't something that my parents never explained to me. Like there was this war, it was sort of like a civil war, or maybe it was, you know, a war against two countries. The Americans were involved somehow, and then we found ourselves in the U.S., and then we got to sort of start all over again, you know? So I kind of like understand that. And then of course, my parents, like every other Sunday, would take us to these anti-communism protests, and they were pretty violent as a kid, to see like effigy of like Ho Chi Minh being set on fire and protests and this and that. And as a kid, I was just trying to make sense of all of this. It was also very visual for me too. I guess from early on, I was a very visual person. Of course, that's how I got into the art making. But you know, I think it's really. I think as an artist myself, I try to understand all perspective of a situation or an event, so I could really learn about everyone's perspective on that, and how do I create art to also serve all that multiple perspective, you know. And that's the one thing I think you hear a lot with artists is that we don't have answer to give. We just sort of like make work that also asks more question, and I think the questions is really rich, you know, for the discussion that happens when you look at a work of art. Yeah, thank you. Oh, yeah.
Hi, my name's Scott. So the idea of belonging, so which has obviously been seminal in your work, right? We are living in an era where the redefinition of belonging in America is being contested and perhaps redefined by political forces. And I'm wondering, as you contemplate that, do you expect, do you plan or do you think that there's a direction in your work that might interrogate that idea of who can belong? Because that's very much what we're in the middle of right now. A kind of a redefinition of who deserves the American dream.
Yeah. Well, in my own practice, I know when I start making art, I don't make work about the moment. I've been making work, you know, like I've been making work about these ideas and these feelings of belonging since the beginning of my art journey. And I guess it's moments like this where the artwork takes on a different meaning because of the political climate we live in. And that's the other thing I think about art making is that, you know, contemporary artists make art about our contemporary times. You know, they can actually make the work about the moment itself, and you can maybe even see that with like political posters or you know, signage. I mean, any forms of visual work in a way, or it can be like, you know, these subject matters has always been like gnawing away at you. Just you know, even early on when I was a kid, I felt these moments of being a foreigner or being excluded, you know. And like the first time I ever witnessed like white supremacy was actually watching a talk show. Oh my God, I forgot the talk show host name, but it was they had some white supremacy on stage, and I must be like 8 or 9 years old. Gerardo. Yeah.
Yes,
And there was this big fight on stage, and I was like, oh my God, I realized, wow, there's people out there that hates you for the way you look, you know. And that was like just mind-boggling to me, you know, because I grew up in the Bay Area around a lot of different cultures and ethnicities and races and stuff like that. But yeah, the belonging issue is, I think it's always in there in my work somehow, and it's something that I always continue to focus on.
I want to go back to the photography.
Yes.
And one of my, I've heard things said is that one of my best friends is the trash can. And I'm just wondering, how many times do you get it, like the aha moment, or do you have to go back and, that didn't work, I need to do it again, or, oh no, what did I do this time, you know? And I was just wondering, percentage-wise, what do you have to kind of see worked and didn't work?
Yeah, it just takes a lot of work, you know.
Oh, I know. I mean, I
yeah.
that.
I mean, the aha moment is always a surprise to me too, because it's like something you don't expect, you know, and even like trying to come up with an idea of printing on leaves. Like it was just an idea I had in my mother's garden. When I was just looking at her plants, I was like, I wonder if I could put an image onto that. And then, of course, through just experimentation in the studio, then you get this aha moment. And then you have to sort of work your way through it. But yeah, no, it's a long process. And I still crave for those aha moments too. And these days I kind of get it in the daguerreotypes because I'm out there photographing. I'm not quite sure what's going to happen in front of the scene. You know, for example, if there's people in the scene, or is it the wind's going to shake the branches. But when I develop a plate and it's a good plate and it's a plate I want to keep, those are like the rewards that I get, you know. Because sometimes when I make these heights, you know, I really regret, like, oh my God, these cameras, equipment, I'm taking like hours and hours to get to a viewpoint. I was just really hating myself until I get these plates that work really well. And then, of course, the joy of it is to share it with the public, you know, with you all in the exhibit. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Feel free to throw a hand up so I know who is interested in another question. Other side of the room, here I come.
Hey, Ben. First off, I'm super glad to be here. I actually work at the Rec Center, and I was scrolling on the Auburn page of calendar events, and I stumbled upon this, and I'm super glad to be here.
Amazing.
So, you know, my mom is an art teacher, and I've kind of grown up, you know, being toted along to different art exhibits and stuff. I'm from Birmingham, so I've gone to that art museum a million times. Could probably walk you around there. And just recently got back into film photography, and I love it. So I saw your work, and I was like, this is going to be phenomenal. Kind of have two questions for you. One is your subject matter, the nature. I'm, of course, a big fan of the national parks, done multiple road trips and stuff. What was that as like a childhood memory that kind of like made it like kind of like click that like this is kind of where I want to see my art go in that direction? And then my second question is with taking and printing on this foliage, I need to know more about your process and like maybe over time, is it going to, you know, kind of, how do I say this, basically degrade or not degrade or weather in that process, and kind of what does that maybe mean for you, or like how do you want to preserve that?
Yeah, definitely. So the first question, you know, I didn't grow up going camping, and one is my parents never took us camping because we own a family business, which is a TV repair shop. So I grew up watching a lot of like TVs, you know, because it was always like 10 TVs playing at the same time. And I'm looking back and forth at Gerardo and PBS and all this stuff. So I was very, you know, drowned with visual imageries in that way. And of course, I credit some of that experience to my art making today. The other thing too is like my family, of course, my parents didn't have a concept of camping. And then when they hear the word camp, they associate it to like refugee camp. You know, like we spend like almost a year in a refugee camp, you know, in Malaysia, and they were like, why do people want to do that? Why do you want to go out into the wilderness? You know, it's like a survival thing, you know. So yeah, I didn't have that connection. And then whenever I go to my friend's house, you know, this white boy, I would see pictures of his family, like camping pictures everywhere. And I was like, wow, this is like the most American thing to do, is to go camping. You know, you got to go camping. So when I went camping for the first time in the 5th grade, I was really building it up. I was very nervous, and my father bought me a camera kit, and it was like a point and shoot camera with film, as you mentioned. And it was the first time I ever used a camera. And so I still have these photographs today. These are like my first landscape photographs. So, and I just really loved the idea that I was able to capture this moment through photography, just at an early age in the 5th grade. Yeah. So your second question, and I actually brought
Yeah,
a
visual
little visual here, and feel free to take a look at this in the cafe later when we meet. But this is a setup of how I make a chlorophyll print. It's actually a transparency placed on top of a freshly plucked leaf, and then put into a contraption like this. This sheet of glass, the transparency, which has your image on it, and then the leaf behind that. And then there's like a backing board. And all this is held together with binder clips. Now I put this setup in the sun for about a day or two, and then the sunlight will bleach out the chlorophyll. And I actually did some research. There's actually a phenomenon that happens. I forgot the title happened when chlorophyll loses its pigment through the bleaching process of the sunlight. So after that, the setup is removed, and then you pull out a leaf with an image on it. And then in my case, I preserved the leaf in these blocks of resin, and you can see example of that in the gallery here. And for me, I think about the work very scientifically. As I mentioned in the talk, this block of resins to study these this organic material that also contain this history in them. So the question is, do they fade? Yeah, you do have to protect them. So in the gallery, in that state, they don't fade that much, but I wouldn't exhibit these for like any longer period than like a few months, and then just kind of put them away. Especially if you have bright windows and things like that, that those can fade. And early on as an artist, I was there was an incident that happened where some of my work did fade, and I was very sad that this happened. And I was like, oh man, I failed as an artist, because art has to last forever. It has to last 300 years and things like that. But today, I kind of accept that, because photographs themselves do fade, and just like our memories kind of fade too as we continue to live our lives. So that kind of becomes a concept for me to some of this work. Yeah.
You're not coating your leaf with like an emulsion?
No, I'm not. It's all natural process. Yeah, it's all a natural process.
Like you would do a silver negative print.
Yeah, you could coat it with like a light sensitive emulsion, like silver nitrate emulsion or something. But yes, exactly. But this is all done naturally because, the leaves is light sensitive, and how I came upon this idea too, that it was when I was a child, I always noticed that when you place something on the lawn, as a kid, cutting the lawn was my job, my chore, and if you lift up the object like a rake or like a water hose, it will leave a silhouette of that object. So that idea always stayed with me until my years in art school. It came back, and I started to experiment with doing this. Yeah.
So glad that visual aid came in handy.
Yeah, so I'm glad we have that.
Thanks. One more question.
Hey, first of all, thank you for being here. I wanted to ask a little bit about, obviously, your different collections can mean different things to different people. People resonate with them for different reasons. And I wanted to see if you had any particular collections that stand out to you that you are most proud of and fulfilled by, or if you feel that they all hold a similarly sized space in your story as an artist.
Yeah. And when you talk about collections, are you thinking like some of the artifacts I collected that I use in my work, or are you talking about like my bodies of work?
Like your bodies of work and like the types of work that you shoot, the types of areas that you're shooting.
Yeah, I don't have any favorites, as an artist. I work on projects in a way. And every project is sort of like unique in this way. And I just sort of like, have to come up with something, you know. If you do go on my website, there's these projects are organized onto, you know, different pages in a way, and I don't know. I mean, the National Park Series is something I always enjoyed doing, and I think I will continue doing throughout my life. And I stopped making chlorophyll prints like since 2008. You know, as an artist, I like to keep moving on and experimenting with new materials, new photographic surfaces. The work on silver platters is kind of new for me, you know, even though the idea I had was like 20 years ago, you know, and I was like, oh God, I have this strange idea. And it wasn't until recently that I started to experiment with that too. So yeah, I don't know what other ideas I have. But yeah, hopefully there's something else will come out in the next couple of years for me.
So you've printed on leaves, you've printed on plates. Is there a next object in line?
Yeah. I don't know. I haven't gotten to like the AI wave yet, but I don't think I will, because I'm much more of a documentary, because I like actual things in physical spaces and physical environment, who we are and things like that. So yeah.
All right. If there's no final questions, I thought we might just end with, you know, there's obviously a lot of students in the room tonight, maybe some budding photographers, perhaps. Do you have any sort of final words of wisdom or advice to young photographers today?
Those are always the hardest questions, because it's like, I don't know what to say other than just continue making art. You know, even no one's listening, no one's paying attention. You know, continue living a creative life, you know, and even though you're not making art, continue looking at art. I think it's just really important just to look at art. You know, look at the art in this museum here. I mean, some of these artwork are 100 or 50 years old, and you learn so much about the time period when the art was made, you know, and so yeah, continue making art, looking at art is my advice.
I think that's good advice for all of us.
Thank you both so much. That was wonderful.
Thank you.